Welcome back to, I'm going to call it fall. I take a little bit of a summer respite for Club E, as well as a personal downtime. So I hope you all enjoyed your summers as much as I enjoyed mine. Kids are off to school, and the state fair is here, and it's getting cool at night. And so Club E is back up and running. So thank you all for fitting me and us into your schedule. Today's event is co-hosted by Upsize Minnesota and my group, Club E. My name is Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club, welcome to our panel discussion on the right staff, building a better and more positive workforce. For those of you who might have your head in the sand, if you haven't figured it out yet, we're in a very hot labor market. Unemployment is near an all-time low at about 3%, and labor market participation is about 70%, which is an all-time high. And so finding, selecting, recruiting, hiring, and retaining the right people are very challenging in this particular point in time in the labor market that we're in. In addition, it's not easy to avoid the pitfalls that sometimes are part of the process of building the right team. So to help business owners build bigger and better companies, Upsize Minnesota and Club E has assembled today's event, and we are going to introduce to you a panel of experts who can serve as your trusted advisors to navigate this process. Upsize Minnesota is a how-to business magazine helping you folks build a bigger and more profitable company. Club E and my firm, Brimacombe Capital, inspire business owners like you to achieve more than you thought possible, as well as provide strategic advice and financial support. In our efforts to provide actionable content, Upsize Minnesota and Club E offer you today's panel, and as such, I want to introduce you to our event sponsors. Brown & Brown Insurance is a provider of insurance and reinsurance products and services. Irish Titan is an e-commerce and strategic digital agency. Scouts Talent is a financial and accounting staffing firm, and Winthrop & Weinstein is a general practice law firm. Thank you to our sponsors, and I greatly appreciate their support. These events wouldn't happen without them, and so again, thank you very much. I've interacted with all these folks and their firms personally, and I know that they would be able to take care of you and your firms if you so choose and have an opportunity to work with them. So with that, let's get to our panels, and I will introduce each one of them, and then we'll circle back and let them have an opportunity to tell you all a little bit more about themselves. To my immediate left is James Claremont. James is Managing Principal of Employee Benefits at Brown & Brown Insurance. Susan Haugen is Director of Recruiting and Partner of Scouts Talent. Darren Lynch is Founder and CEO of Irish Titan. And Mark Pyhart is Attorney and Shareholder at Winthrop & Weinstein, where he focuses on employment counseling. We do, in talking to Susan beforehand, we have a disproportionately large share of our panel today with red hair, so we're going with the red hair panel today. That's not easy to do. I had to work really hard. Next time we'll have Robbie on the panel, and then we'll go 4 for 4. We also have 2 Hawkeyes on the far left. I am a Gopher, so I can't say I'm too proud or excited to have them here, but I did find that out as we were prepping for the panel here in the event today. So if you're a Hawkeye fan or like the red hair, we got what you need today. All right. So with that, James, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Thank you, and obviously I don't have red hair. I don't have any hair, but it was brown. It was blonde when I was a kid, but brown later, but now gone. I started in the employee benefits consulting field in 1994, working for a regional agency in town, and got experience in designing various plans for various employers across multiple industries, collective bargaining agreements, different sizes, public, private. In 2002, I founded Claremont Financial Group, which we were able to grow from nothing into something. We ended up landing on the Business Journal's top 25 insurance brokers 5 years in a row, prior to an acquisition in 2017 in which we agreed to merge with Brown & Brown Insurance. I call it a merger, they called it an acquisition. But And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so, for the past 2 years, I have been managing the employee benefits division of Brown and Brown Insurance in Minneapolis. Brown and Brown's a public company. We have 10,000 teammates across 40 states. We call them teammates, not employees. We have leaders, not bosses. Fabulous culture. We're going to talk more about culture, and I won't steal Darren's thunder there. But probably the biggest part of my focus today is going to be to try and encourage you to think about benefits in sort of a non-traditional way, and to get beyond sort of the health plan, dental plan, 401k, short-term, long-term disability, life, optional life, flex plan, HSA. Those are all great, and you need them, and we probably all have them, but we've found that by really understanding the demographic and the needs and wants of the individuals that you specifically want to attract, that you can design benefit programs that are more effective and will help you to attract and retain the best and brightest.
Great. And I found out today that James is a world-class golf scramble player. So if you're looking to win your next golf scramble, you definitely want to have James on your
If
team.
you're looking to have vodka lemonade, come to my force.
All right, Susan, tell us a little bit more about your background.
Thanks, Rick. I am a former CPA who found herself with life and work out of balance and discovered consulting as a new way to work. I loved it because I could focus on doing the work that I wanted to do and not be distracted by boring meetings, office politics, unpaid overtime. I did that for about 10 years, and then I came into the Scouts office to have them help me find my next contract, and I admitted during the interview that my dream job was to be a recruiter of finance consultants, and now I am lucky to be a co-owner of one of the best staffing firms in the Twin Cities. So Scouts is, like I said, in the business of placing finance professionals on interim and project roles. All of the partners have over 20 years experience in this industry, and Scouts was formed really to practice best practices. We lead with honesty, open communication with our clients and our consultants, and we try to make decisions for the long term. I have a recent example that I think tells this story well. We have a favorite controller of ours who started a new job, and to her dismay found that the systems and processes were terribly out of date and maybe antiquated, would say that, and she quickly determined that she couldn't do her full-time controller role and update the processes. So we found a gentleman we'd recently met who had done the same thing when he took his last controller role, but it was all cleaned up now, and he was kind of bored of doing the same thing month after month. We introduced them. There was a great personality fit before the interview was over. She said, "Hey, can you start tomorrow? I really need you." And this is just an example of one of my favorite types of roles that we fill, because he is going to make an indelible impression on her job, honestly, her work-life balance, and truly the growth and profitability of the company going forward. So it's a win-win-win situation. So if any of you have a need like that, we'd be happy to help you out.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Darren.
So I'm Darren Lynch. I'm the founder and CEO of Irish Titan. I apologize. I am the reason that we got out of the gates late here. I'm not the best with details, and just kind of assumed that this started a little bit later, so my apologies. Irish Titan's been around for 15 years. We're a digital agency. We really specialize in e-commerce. So what we do in plain spoken terms is we build websites and then work with our clients on the strategy and marketing for those websites. So do email marketing and SEO and paid search and content and all that kind of stuff. What I think is most relevant to the topic at hand today is that we do all of our work with just our employees. And that is exceedingly rare in our space, because most companies in our space, for very good reasons, use contractors, freelancers, offshore resources to varying degrees. And again, that makes a lot of sense. There were a lot of people much smarter than me when I started Irish Titan who I was leaning on for advice that told me how dumb it was to try to do this with an employee-only model. And I said, yeah, you're probably right, and I get that, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so here we are 15 years later, 30-some employees, and we've been on the best places to work for multiple best places to work lists for quite a few years now, which is something I take a lot of pride in, because with that employee-only model, culture is super important to retain employees. As Rick mentioned, it's a hard market right now to find employees and to retain them. I think every industry is competitive. Ours feels anyway exceedingly competitive because technical, digital, marketing focused people can sort of, as I like to say, walk across the street and get a different job, and salaries are competitive, benefits are competitive, et cetera. So there has to be more than that to maintain employees, and we've tried to do some things in that vein, and hopefully we've done better than we have done worse, right? Because we've retained employees pretty well. So that's what I'm here to hopefully talk about and share a little bit. And again, since I was late, I didn't have a chance to say hi to a lot of the friendly faces I see in the crowd. So hopefully I can talk to you afterwards. Sorry.
And then a little tidbit on Darren. He's, if we're talking about world-class capabilities, he's a world-class observer of rodeos, because I've been to a couple with him. So if you want to talk rodeos, Darren's your guy.
I do like rodeo. Yes. I grew up on a farm in Iowa. I'm sort of obligated to like rodeo.
So Darren's your guy on that. Mark, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm also from Iowa, and I like to tell people, just as to start a conversation, that I'm from the East Coast, and then I pause for a couple seconds and tell them of Iowa. So I've been practicing for 23 years. 19 of those have been with Winthrop and Weinstein. Just a little bit about Winthrop and Weinstein. We're a general practice law firm. When I started with the firm, we had 50 some attorneys, and now we have around 140 plus attorneys. So we've seen substantial growth over the years. And, we're a M&A transactional firm, as well as a big practice of business litigators. Specifically what I do, I'm an employment attorney. Employment counseling is my area of specialty. I started my practice as an employment litigator, which I think gives me a unique perspective when I'm advising all of you on employment issues, because I've got that litigation background, and I'm thinking, what's going to happen if this gets sued out? What's this going to look like? So I also think, this topic in particular is interesting, and I may have a unique perspective on this topic because I do a lot of training around the country for employers. And it's on a whole host of topics, and it kind of covers what I do with my counseling background as well. It's kind of what I refer to as the cradle to grave, everything from pre-employment to hiring to retention, managing employees to termination to post-employment. So I'm doing a lot of training around the country on these various topics, and I get to see certain trends. And probably no surprise to all of you in this room, over the past couple of years, I've been asked more often than not to do respectful workplace training. And I think it's a reaction to the hashtag #MeToo movement in part, but it's also a reaction to our changing work environment. And we are going to talk a lot about work culture today, and I think that's going to come into play with all this. I also have a lot of stories to tell.
And we'll give you
There's
that
some pretty
opportunity.
interesting things. And I always kind of have this top 10 list in my head of the crazy stories I hear in the workplace. Most of those I can't talk about in public, but I am going to share one with you because it's about 20 years old. And I think it's pretty interesting and somewhat entertaining. So, set the stage. Manufacturing environment, 2 employees, man and woman, who are coworkers and are otherwise friendly in the workplace, good coworkers toward one another. They get into an argument, and at some point in time, the woman kicks the man in the leg. And the guy goes to HR and says he's been assaulted, and he has to go home for the rest of the day. So he goes home, and later that day, he calls back to the workplace and explains further about his injuries, that he went to the doctor, and he has a contusion. And he's also a shaman, which is a religious leader, and it's very offensive for him to be assaulted by a woman, so his family has to go through a cleansing ritual, which entails sacrificing a cow. And he wants to know if the company is going to pay for this. So after I stopped laughing, I'm envisioning they're going to have a luau, they're going to sacrifice this cow.
You're going to have a hamburger.
Right, exactly. They're going to have a big party. After I stopped laughing, I said, no, work comp is his exclusive remedy, end of story. So that's the kind of stuff that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And again, I've got all kinds of interesting stories. And to this day, I keep telling myself, I've heard it all. There's nothing that you can tell me that's going to surprise me. But to this day, I'm still surprised by some of the things I hear that happen in the workplace.
I might have one story I want to run by you in private. And Tara knows which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, let's maybe keep that one private. Okay, all right, let's come back down here, James. Spend a couple minutes, kind of tell us a little bit about your perspectives and views overall at the topic. We'll get into some specific questions later, but come down here and then we'll work our way to the left on the panel. But tell us a little bit more from your perspective about today's topic.
Well, the employee benefits field is very dynamic, and it's an important consideration for individuals when they're trying to determine where they want to go to work. And I mentioned that it's going to be kind of a recurring thing. We're going to talk about things that are maybe sort of non-traditional from a benefits perspective, or talk about how culture feeds into benefits and the relationship between those two. But I'll give you an example of something that it's a personal story that we found in our own organization. So one of the really difficult positions for us to staff and retain is that of account service manager. So when we win a new account, there will be an individual who is really my right hand. They're client facing. They know as much about insurance as I do. They're going to handle the day-to-day aspects of managing the plan, answer questions from employees, all that sort of thing. It's a very important role in our organization. It trends overwhelmingly female, and the age demographic is probably age 30 to 50. So how many women in the room are mothers? By show of hands, quite a few, right? So that 30 to 50 age demographic, female, is going to be made up of obviously a lot of women with children. And so flexibility of schedule really became paramount in developing the benefits and compensation package that we provided for those people. I had one individual in particular. Oh, and the other thing that I found was at one time, fully half of the staff working for me were not just mothers, but single mothers. And so they had a whole other set of needs and wants. And so we developed, and actually my friend to the left coined this term for me initially, a results-oriented work environment, or a ROE. So there was no PTO to be requested at any time. Basically, you make your own schedule. And so one of my primary account service managers was an early riser, and so she would tend to be up at 5 a.m. and work from home, complete remote environment. She had an office and a place to go if she wanted. This is Gina, Tara, by the way. And she would bang out 50 emails by 7 a.m. and then she'd kind of go radio silent for a while because she was getting her daughter up and having breakfast with her and getting her on the school bus, and she'd walk out and wait for the school bus with her daughter with all the other moms and do that. And then maybe she'd go to a yoga class or do whatever she wanted to do in the morning. She'd come back and sit back in front of a screen at 10 a.m. and many of those 50 emails that she'd sent out had now been responded to, and so then she could take the next step with whatever she needed to do throughout the course of her day. And then she'd do that till about 3 o'clock, and then she'd shut down again because now daughter's home from school and she's getting dinner on the table and doing everything else that she wants to do. And then she would close her day usually about 7 p.m. and then I'd get another series of sort of updates on where we were at with various accounts. And so that became the single most important benefit. And it's not an insurance benefit. It's strictly a benefit that's designed around being able to operationally provide that flexibility. And we were actually able to pay, if not below market a little bit, certainly at the market and not above market, which in my industry right now, those positions are being fought for, much like in your industry and many industries, at above market rate. And the guys across town are trying to poach the people in my office and we'll pay you 20% more. Well, that's great, but can I work at home and set my own schedule? Because the 20% isn't going to take care of, being able to get my daughter off the bus every day. And so that was an example of a benefit design that we created with an understanding of this is the target demographic, this is what really matters to them. And so for all of you in this room, the first step that we like to take when we're evaluating an employee benefits program, we get brought in to consult. Frequently, the question is, well, how can you lower our costs? How can you improve our coverage? How can you make it more efficient? Can you help us with compliance? And those are all important things. But the question I like to start with is, why are you doing what you're doing? Who are you trying to attract? And is what you have in place helping you do that? Or is it just legacy from someone else's vision when the company was very different or smaller, or the labor market wasn't this tight, or whatever else? So we like to start there. Any fishermen in the room? Yeah? So if you're fishing for walleye, you're going to use a different bait and tackle setup than if you're fishing for northern, right? Same thing. Who are you trying to hire? And in a multi-generational workforce, different groups want different things.
Great, thank you. Susan?
I would like to make sure at the end of this that everybody understands when is a temp employee the best option. And to tackle that from a company perspective, first, I mentioned that Scouts places people either on an interim basis or a project basis. Interim means you have a sudden vacancy, somebody has been poached by the competition, as we said, or maybe it's something like a maternity leave that's more planned. If you bring in a consultant, they can be there quickly to overlap with the outgoing employee, and they can get up to speed in days rather than weeks or months. Also importantly, having that consultant in there doing the work allows the hiring manager to really do a good and patient search for the right perm employee while the work's getting done. And it means that you don't have to offload those duties onto the other coworkers who might already be overburdened, who might start to feel that their work-life balance is off and start to look at other employers. So the consultant can keep the bus moving forward while the seat is vacant. Another time you might bring in a consultant is when you need a special skill set that you don't have in the company, and maybe you don't want to keep full-time. The process improvement controller that I mentioned earlier is an example of that. He'll come in, he'll make the changes, he'll train the employees, and then he'll go away. The company doesn't want to pay to keep him on, and they couldn't keep him challenged anyway. A big software implementation might be another common example around the Twin Cities. And we have consultants in our roster who've done it time and time again, and they can come in as a trusted partner, advise of the pitfalls ahead, and really make sure that it goes smoothly. Finally, try before you buy is a good time for a consultant. It's always amazed me that we make hiring decisions based on a couple hours of interviews, but if you go the contract to hire route, the company and the consultant can get used to each other, can see if there's a fit there, and can really make a great decision that ultimately will lead to a longer employee retention. From the employee side of you, when is temp the best option? Well, I did it, so I'm kind of evangelical about it, but certainly work-life balance is something we've been alluding to. Consultants don't tend to work more than 40 hours, and if they do, they get paid time and a half for that. That's a small piece, though. I think what's more important is being able to use the skills that you love most and feel most comfortable with and applying those laser-like to the client's need. I've got these restless accountants who don't want to do the same thing every week or every month, and they get to sample different industries, different parts of town, learn new skills for their resume. And I will be the first to use the word millennial. Stereotypically, they don't want to follow a traditional career path, right? They want to build experiences that mirror who they want to be. So they're, again, able to choose industries, software, skill sets. Maybe they want to take a month off. This kind of life enables them to do the sorts of things they want while still contributing in meaningful ways in the talents that they like to use. So those are some of the examples where temp employee makes good sense.
Great, thank you. Darren?
So just a quick little perspective, I guess. So James and I have been friends for 15, maybe 20 years now, from playing basketball together before we ever met professionally.
Not golf.
Yeah, do not ask me to be part of your scramble. We'll not be pretty experienced. And so I thought James and I would be going back the farthest on this panel, but it turns out we have to have met back in college. He worked at Dirty John's, which is a grocery store that specialized in high and low octane liquids. That was really close to a place, the house that we rented in college, that we didn't get our deposit back on at the end of the year. And I think we spent a lot of time at Dirty John's, so we had to meet back then. So there's a lot of Venn diagram going on up here between benefits, the employee model, and culture, as I'm going to talk about. And so this all fits together, and I'll be the first to say that I want to be really clear that I would not claim that Irish Titan has nailed culture, right? Because culture really, my definition of it is sort of that informal way that people know this is how we do things around here. And that's very people-driven. And as we all know, people are people, right? And so I got my MBA at St. Thomas and do a lot of mentoring and just one-on-one meetings with people that get referred over. And I was meeting with a young lady who's getting her MBA, and she asked, what's been the best and worst part of your job? And I said, I'll reframe the question to what's been the best and most challenging part of my job, and I can use one word to answer both of those: people. Because people are what gives me energy. It's one of the reasons we have an employee-only, a Titan-only model, as we like to say. But no matter how confident you are in your hire, and how they might be performing or how you might be trying to lead or manage them, people are people. And sometimes there are things that get in the way of their performance, and they don't perform the way you thought they would, or you don't lead and manage them the way you thought you were capable of, et cetera. And all of that starts to tie into culture. So I just want to quickly throw out there that I'll talk through our experiences and my philosophies and that sort of thing, but by no means am I proclaiming that we've cracked that nut. I think from a culture perspective, it comes down to a few things that you really need to keep in mind. And some of it's self-evident, but I think it's really important. First, you have to define your culture, which again, sounds really obvious, but you have to do that, and you have to do that in a way that is distilled down to easily understood concepts. And I'll talk through how we've done this at Irish Titan. And then there are 3 pillars to how you really make that work. 1, you have to have traditions. 2, you have to be consistent. And 3, you have to institutionalize it. So at Irish Titan, I'm a big fan of Guy Kawasaki, who wrote a book called The Art of the Start. And part of what he talks about in that book is don't worry too much about defining your brand and your culture until you have built a product or a service that you're actually selling, and you have some experience with what people are telling you, what's working and what's not. So after a few years of Irish Titan, things were starting to ramp up. That's when I started to take a step back and give some thought as to how I would define our culture. And luckily enough, I was part of a small group meeting with Simon Sinek, who wrote a book called Start With Why, that I am a giant fan of. If I were dramatic enough to say it changed my life, I would say it changed my life. And I had probably 10 or 15 minutes alone with him in a group of 20 over drinks after a speaking event where picked his brain. And so our why, our golden circle, so for those of you not familiar with Simon Sinek, I know a lot of people are, the heart of his Start With Why model is what's called a golden circle. And it's like a bullseye. So there is like a target bullseye. The middle is why, the second ring is how, and the outer ring is what. At that point, we had already trademarked this concept of business first, online second. It was trademarked. It was what I would use as an answer when people would ask me, well, there are a lot of digital agencies. How are you guys really any different? And so I'd say, well, at the end of the day, what makes us different is this notion of business first, online second. Then in our sales materials, we talked about engaging with our clients in a partnerships, not transactions kind of way. And then my elevator speech that we're all taught to have handy was that we, at that time, it was e-commerce and complex websites. That's what we said we did back then. So that's evolved over time. Part of the Start With Why model is that your what can evolve over time as long as your why and your how are solid, okay? So the 2 legs of our culture that we talk about are our golden circle and then our 5 values, which I came up with probably 10-ish years ago, maybe not quite, when I was taking this time to reflect on how I would define our culture. And our 5 values are POTUS, which stands for passion, ownership, teamwork, impact, and skills. And then we have a tagline for each of those. So, for example, passion is on fire from the inside. So the 2 pillars, or the 2 ways we define our culture is our golden circle and POTUS. And we expect all of our Titans to demonstrate those in their own authentic way every day, right? And some of those are more external client-facing and some are more internal. But that's what we expect of everybody. Now, when I talk to candidates, potential Titans, because I still interview towards the end of the process, everybody who's possibly going to join our family, one of the things I talk about is there's an unofficial 3rd leg to our stool, and that is that we are a no snowflake kind of place. And one of the reasons I talk about that is that we really are a kind of no snowflake place. But what that means is that there has to be a culture of respect and acceptance. But if someone's easily offended, we're just not the place for them. Because sometimes I'm the one accidentally doing it. I grew up on a farm, and sometimes I swear more than I should. And so all of this is couched in respect, though, and I've had to make pretty snap decisions on people's tenure at Irish Titan when they've acted in ways that are disrespectful. And I do that without much hesitation. But if someone can't give and take a joke within reason, right, we're not the right kind of place for them. So I talk about that in the interview process. So our official culture pillars are Golden Circle and POTUS with an unspoken, unofficial, no snowflake kind of policy. Then from a traditions, consistency, and institutionalizing it perspective, we've done a lot of things to try to ingrain that culture into our daily DNA. From a traditions perspective, when we have new Titans, we do a monthly company meeting, kind of an EOS best practice. All new Titans have to perform their high school fight song for everybody. And a lot of people don't know it, which is totally fine, and then they pick a different song, and it's become quite a thing. If you go to our Facebook page or YouTube, you'll see everybody's performances over the last few years. People rent costumes, we've had a ukulele, we've had a spoken word, Jon Snow, Irish interpretation of a high school fight song, and it's just a good way for people to become part of the family. At their 1-year anniversary, everybody gets an Irish Titan rugby with their name and their employee number on the back of it. We do a Titan of the quarter. We have a monthly, and they get their name on a plaque along with a keepsake little nugget that gets personalized for them. We do a monthly birthday lunch where all of the Titans who have a birthday that month get to pick what gets brought in. It seems like we have tacos frequently, which is great. It's one of my favorites, and wings yesterday. But that's another thing that we do. So there are traditions that help us maintain that sort of culture. We've institutionalized it with the interviewing process, and then our review process has both POTUS and Golden Circle baked into that process. So the forms and people's get it, want it, can do it sort of criteria using traction speak are based on those cultures. And then institutionalizing it, which maybe I'll get to this later, but there's a bit of a reference to James' mention of Roe, is as we've grown, we've needed to get more and more people comfortable helping to police that. So that if police /enforce /reinforce /encourage those sorts of behaviors, so that whether I or anybody else in the management team are there or not, these sorts of behaviors, this is the way we do things around here, happens. So you have to define it, and then the traditions, the consistency, and the institutionalization.
Great, thank you. Mark.
It's nice to hear how other companies do things internally, and something that resonated with me that you said, Darren, is the traditions piece. And we have traditions at Winthrop and Weinstein also. And when I look back at our firm, and something that I'm proud of, and I know a lot of my partners are proud of, is that we have a lot of long-term employees. And somebody had mentioned the fact that this is a tough labor market, and it is hard to keep good employees. It's tough to recruit them, and once you get them in the door, it's tough to retain them. And from my perspective, you've got this ever-expanding list of state and federal employment laws that makes life sometimes difficult for businesses, for employers. Minnesota happens to be one of the most employee-friendly states in the union. I can oftentimes look to California and Massachusetts and see what's going on an employment level and say, okay, that's coming to Minnesota. It's going to be here in a year or two. And I'm saying that over a period of 20 years. That rings true. This ever-expanding list I'm talking about, I affectionately refer to it as the alphabet soup. It's, the ADA, the ADEA, the FMLA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, the WARN Act. In just this summer, in July, there was another new piece of employment legislation here in Minnesota. It's the wage theft law. Hopefully all of you have heard of it. The materials that I provided that you have in front of you, there's some information on that particular statute. But my point with this is that it's one other thing. It's another thing that employers have to deal with. And to just quickly summarize, it now the new wage theft law states that employers, upon hiring a new employee, they have to provide a very particular written notice to the employees, which sets forth, I'm just going to read this laundry list real quick, the rate of pay, allowances, if any, for meals and lodging, paid vacation, sick time, or other PTO accruals, the employee's status as exempt or non-exempt, a list of deductions, the number of days in the pay period, the regularly scheduled pay day, the legal name of the employer, the address, and the phone number. That's just one component of this new statute. But all of this stuff, and by the way, we heard Susan talking about the use of a contingent workforce, and I think that's a big part of our discussion today, and in particular gig workers and independent contractors. The Minneapolis City Council just met last week and wants to expand this new statute that I'm talking about to apply to contractors and gig workers also. So there's all of these burdens that are put on you as business owners, as employers, when you're trying to recruit and hire and retain employees. And, you know, just the hiring piece, I think one big piece of this is making sure that those who are on the front line with respect to hiring, those managers that are engaging in the hiring, you heard Darren say that he doesn't talk to people until the tail end. Others have met first. You want to make sure that there's consistency across the board, that those managers have been appropriately trained and they know what the protected classifications are within the state of Minnesota or any other state where you're operating. They know the questions you can and cannot ask that might result in legal exposure. You know, another example of something that's relatively new, it was a commonly accepted practice not too long ago to ask an applicant, well, how much do you make now? How much have you made in your prior jobs? Pretty commonly accepted practice, right? Now the EEOC is saying that in asking that question, it is potentially perpetuating an unequal pay system. And the reason why is this. Let's say you're looking at hiring somebody for a position and you ask them, well, what are you making now? $75,000. Okay, you like this person, you want to offer them the job, and we can do better than $75,000. We're going to offer this person $78,000. Well, it turns out internally, the pay scale for that job within your own company is $100,000 to $125,000. Now you've just hired somebody at a much lower pay scale. And the EEOC is telling us that they are engaging in wage audits. That's their new focus, wage audits. And if they come in and they conduct a wage audit and they see, well, you've got these employees at 125 and these employees at maybe 78, there's potential there for a discrimination claim. So again, it's just one more thing to think about. And then with respect to, you know, this is before you even get them in the door, you know, after you get them in the door, you've got a whole host of other considerations. And the retention piece, it's a huge factor for all of you in this room. We're all part of this system where when you hire somebody, you're investing time and resources in that individual. And the last thing you want is to invest a bunch of time and resources and have that person jump ship a year or two later. So the retention piece, I think, comes back to this thing that all four of us have now mentioned, which is work culture. What is the work environment? What's that culture? And there are certain things I think that you want to make sure are in place so that you can retain and keep those good employees. Are there opportunities for development and advancement? That's one of the biggest things that I'm hearing. How am I going to be trained? Is this an environment of, swim or sink type of mentality, or is it my employer is going to invest in me and provide me with the training and resources so I feel like this could be a career as opposed to just another job that I might jump from 2 years from now. So I think all that plays into this.
Great, thank you. So in terms of the layout for the rest of the day, I have a couple of individual questions for each of the panelists. I then have a list of questions that are kind of general for the entire panel to address. At that point, if you have a question and you want to participate in the conversation, raise your hand and I'll try to weave your question into our conversation. So again, just a couple of individual questions for our panelists before we go to the group questions. James, let's come back down here. Talk a little bit about the keys for designing the employee benefits programs that help maximize the ability to attract and retain the best and the brightest.
So again, kind of in keeping with the theme of trying to structure your benefit programs around really targeting the individuals that you want to need based on their age, all that sort of thing. If you're hiring millennials and a tuition or student loan reimbursement program is not part of your benefits program, you're going to be vulnerable to organizations that there are offering that, because it's a very important benefit to that demographic. It's, again, a non-traditional benefit. It's not typically what we think of in terms of health plan 401k, which, you know, in traditional employee surveys are always considered the most valuable benefits, but to that group, it's an exceptionally valuable benefit. We instituted it at Brown & Brown this year. I'm talking about student loan repayment support, and it was completely oversubscribed. The budget that we had for it was blown through way before we got to the end of the line of people who wanted to get involved with that. And, you know, we came to find out that some of the teammates working with us that were in their late 30s, early 40s still had an issue with that particular thing. So it's not just perhaps the millennial group that would be interested in that, but kind of along those same lines. I'm kind of old, so I was back selling insurance in 1999. Is anyone in the room remember 1999? Well, specifically from the standpoint of trying to staff IT, we had this silly little thing called Y2K that was coming down the pike that was having to be dealt with 2 and 3 years prior. So let's say the whole late 90s, right? And, you know, gosh, on January 2nd, you're not going to be able to flush your toilet and your car won't start and every other thing, right? Which we found out wasn't the case, but organizations had to prepare for that. At the same time, what did we have going on? The .com craze, right? So people that were in your industry, that's probably why you went into MIS, wasn't it? Because you were going to change the world and make a fortune, which you have. So back then, we had a client, some of you might remember this company, Rick Bourne had an IT consulting firm, and he brought in Glenn Fry of the Eagles to do a concert for his employees as part of their company picnic at his home out on Lake Minnetonka. That's a pretty unique benefit, right? For the guys and gals in the room that are my age who know who the Eagles are. And then he did things like he purchased really attractive resort properties in South Beach and Aspen and things like that. And if you were part of that team, you were able to just say, put your name on the list, and you want to go skiing in Aspen, they're going to hand you the keys, or you want to, you know, go on your honeymoon in South Beach and stay in a great place looking at the ocean, you can do that too. And that also, just to piggyback on what Darren was talking about culture, those kinds of things become interwebbed with the overall culture of the organization. This is who we are. This is what we do. We play hard. We work hard. This is what's important to us as an organization. And so, you know, when I was talking earlier about what we did with our account service managers, I realized that not every organization has the ability to just tell people to work from home, right? But the key element, I think, is to identify what kind of things you can do that go above and beyond the traditional health plan, dental plan, FICA, FUTA, SUTA, which are, you know, mandated benefits, but everybody's doing that. That's not going to differentiate you. You're not going to have somebody tell you they came to work for you because you have Blue Cross as your carrier for health insurance. That's right. So you need to understand who you're trying to attract and then develop systems and benefits programs in concert with your culture that will then allow you to attract those people and keep them.
Great. Shifting gears a little bit, but keeping it as a business conversation, not a political conversation.
Are we going to jump right into this?
Yeah, we are. Yes.
I thought we were going to go around the robin.
No. I'm down here. I got you. You're listening. We're going to stay here. So, socialized medicine, Medicare for all. It's going to impact the employee benefit landscape not from a political perspective, but from a business perspective.
So
Tell
he
us a little
shared
bit
with
about
me that this question might be coming, and you guys probably all know that Rick is just a bleeding heart liberal, and so I wasn't sure how to approach this with the folks in the room.
From a business perspective, not a political perspective.
Did everybody enjoy the drive down here to get into the club today and all the road construction? It seems almost as if they're trying to design the streets so that it's difficult to drive in Minneapolis, but that was
Shocking.
It's amazing.
It
isn't
is amazing.
I was going to ride my bicycle, but I had to come from Eden Prairie, so
Is there a train yet from Eden Prairie?
there will be.
Okay.
So this is a question that I think is going to continually be raised as we move into the election cycle, and healthcare has been a political football for many years, as we know. And the idea that at some point our nation will transition into some form of either Medicare for all or some other form of socialized medicine, I would say to you that it's a when, not an if. I think that will happen. I think the continuation of the increased cost of providing healthcare, which is driven by so many factors that we could spend all day talking about it, not the least of which is that insurance companies want to make a lot of money. Your expense is their revenue, if you think about that. So your carrier partner really isn't your partner, but I'm not going to go down that road. I think at some point we're going to see some form of socialized medicine. And we have it today. We have it with the Medicare system, which is for folks over age 65 and people who are afflicted with certain types of catastrophic illnesses like end-stage renal disease and things of that nature can qualify. But the program has a lot of gaps in it, and so the Medicare system now has Medigap or supplementary coverages that most people buy from private insurance companies, and it fills in what the government program doesn't. So I guess the point of all this is to say that even if health insurance goes away, there's going to be a continued need to offer various kinds of benefits, such as supplementary coverage on the health plan, which, by the way, we have some clients that operate in the UK and Canada, and that is something that they offer to their employees. If you come to work for us, you get everybody gets the government plan, but then this is what we give that's above and beyond. And then that also ties into the overall theme that I've been promoting all morning/afternoon, which is that you need to think outside of just the traditional types of benefits that we all know about when you're designing your program. And no matter what the government ends up doing, your responsibility and your need to do that in order to attract and retain isn't going to go away.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. Susan, how have things changed in the staffing and consulting industry over time, and what are some of the latest trends?
Thank you for asking that. Changes in the staffing industry are similar, I would say, to changes in the overall employment industry. One thing that stands out to me in particular is the speed of change, right? Companies are being acquired, they're merging, they're reorganizing, and often this is leaving tenured, trusted employees in a layoff position. So the perm job that you thought you had isn't necessarily a perm job anymore. I think sometimes consulting offers you a choice of when to end rather than to be in a perm job and just ending and kind of being out on the street. Marry that up with the fact that consulting is a more acceptable career. It's not just a temp job that you have to do between perm jobs. There are career consultants who we work with, who I was, who are networked with other consultants, who are known in the marketplace for their skill set. It's now okay to do that, and there are structures in place to help that. Touching briefly on the benefits piece, benefits have traditionally kept employees, well, not traditionally, have sometimes kept employees in jobs that they weren't really fulfilling to them, but to leave your insurance behind or to go out without benefits can be scary, and I think that's changing in terms of being able to get your retirement savings in the marketplace or get your health benefits in the marketplace, and you can price that into your salary, right? If you think you're being paid $150,000 a year, you're not, because there are other costs that your employer's paying for you, and you can factor that into your total pay and take care of that yourself and make your own choices. Lastly, I'd say as more employers are aware of consulting and the benefits they can bring, there are more consulting opportunities. So consultants have a wider choice of the types of roles they take. They can rest assured they'll be employed 50 or 52 weeks a year if that's what they choose. So there's more opportunities there. You asked about trends. I would say some interesting trends we're seeing and I think this would apply both on the contract and on the perm side, is that hiring managers are starting to look more for intangibles or soft skills. They want someone who can be analytical or strategic or, roll with the punches. They'll teach them the software. They'll teach them the med tech industry. It's important to hire for a personality in many cases. And then, as James was talking about, we're seeing more opportunities for remote work. That was never a thing in consulting. And just this summer, we've had a small handful of roles that we can offer our consultants to work from home. Some or all the time work from home, but have Skype meetings, go to co-working and have meetings, different ways that's penetrating the consulting world, and really being able to appeal to a wide variety of work styles.
Great. Talk a little bit about some of the common misconceptions about hiring a consultant and some common mistakes that companies make when they're staffing up through consultants.
Sure. There could be a misconception that a temp is low level, and certainly those positions exist. But we at Scouts staff, like I said, we're concentrated in the accounting and finance, and we staff anywhere from, say, a $70,000 a year person up through, interim controllers, interim CFOs. I mean, there's not a ceiling on the types of work that consultants can do. From tactical to strategic. So I always hesitate to use the word temp because I think that implies a lower level. It might imply also a lack of commitment to the role, but a career consultant, I think, has the very same level of commitment to the assignment they're on and the employer they're working for. This is a bullet on their resume. This is part of their network. These are skills they're picking up, and often consultants will stay beyond their original commitment, beyond the time they're really thrilled by the role because the right perm employee hasn't been found. The company still needs them. We hear this time and again. I'll stick around until they don't need me anymore. There's definitely a level of commitment. Well, I would say a big misconception as well is that temporary employees are more expensive. And how I said, if you think you're making $150,000, you're making more because there are these embedded costs. If you add that all in, the consultant really isn't that much more expensive because you're not paying, the employer's not paying for their benefits. If you make a bad hire because you rushed into it or you don't have the right fit, that can be extremely expensive to an organization, and a consultant might help you avoid that cost as well. Mistakes. Well, speed. I think we'll probably get into speed of hiring with this tight market. If you are considering getting a consultant and your organization is a little maybe bureaucratic, by the time you make that offer, that consultant might already have accepted one of their 3 other possible opportunities. So I would say if this is an option you're taking, don't overanalyze. Make a move. Along those same lines, don't hire your consultant like they are a perm employee. Don't have 10 things that you absolutely need because you're not going to find them all. The work will be done by then. These consultants are nimble, they're quick, they're agile. They can get the things done that need to get done, even if they don't know everything that you thought you needed them to know.
Great. Thank you. Mark, let's go down to you, and then we'll come back with Darren and some other culture stuff. What are some of the biggest areas of legal exposure for employers when they're making their hiring decisions?
Sure. Well, one of these I touched upon already. It's making sure that those individuals that are in charge of actually making those hiring decisions know what the laws are. And I referenced the protected classifications and making sure that those hiring managers know what the protected classifications are. And some of it's real obvious. It's not typically those obvious protected classifications that are the issues anymore. Everybody knows you can't discriminate against somebody based on gender or age or disability. Sometimes the mental disabilities create a problem for employers, but there are other other protected classifications that are not as widely known, and we're seeing a significant uptick in claims, failure to hire claims by applicants based on some of these protected classifications. For example, familial status. or marital status. There may be this assumption that, well, if this person's married or this person has young children at home, he or she is not going to be as dedicated to the job, and therefore the decision is made to hire somebody else. What I hate to see, whenever I get a call and there's a nasty gram from an attorney already, or perhaps even a lawsuit, I'll ask to see the personnel file or the hiring file. And when I open that up and I see a resume or a CV that has handwritten notes on it, and it might say young children at home, underline, 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 exclamation point, married, something like that, or something that highlights a protected class, and that's the basis of the claim, that's a problem. That's a discoverable document. So, again, making sure that those individuals who are on the front lines, maybe all of you in this room know all this, but you're not the ones that are first meeting with these applicants and who are getting, the first run through, and they don't even make it to you because somebody else has made a decision. This one isn't going to make it to the second stage. You have to make sure that those individuals know the rules. Right along with that is maintaining what I would say is a fair and impartial process with respect to hiring. And I see this mistake made often in the workplace where one manager might decide, I'm not going to hire this individual because this individual has a drug conviction. And next department over, hiring manager just hired somebody who has a drug conviction. Those types of differences, that lack of consistency within the process, makes it right for somebody to bring a claim and say, because we're all in protected classifications, multiple protected classifications, and it's easy for somebody then to take a swing and say, well, I think the real reason I wasn't hired is because of this. So those are probably the two biggest things that I would say that create legal exposure for employers within the hiring process.
Okay. Susan's talked a little bit about staffing through consultants and given us some perspectives from her side of the table on that. From the legal side, talk a little bit about some of the issues that come up using a contingent workforce or independent contractors.
Yeah. So for me, this is a big one. With respect to enforcement of employment laws, and this is not a political statement, but the pendulum kind of swings back and forth depending on who's in the White House. During the Obama administration, there was a directive from the White House to focus on misclassification of workers. And that's still an important focus of both the Department of Labor and the IRS, perhaps not as important today as it was, but there are some huge red flags when talking about use of a contingent workforce. And again, I'm speaking simply from a legal standpoint. Susan addressed, situations where you might want to use a contingent workforce. And if we're talking about gig workers or independent contractors, probably the biggest red flag is that you rush in to hire somebody because you have this sudden gap. Somebody left and you need to fill that spot right away. And your best resource is to bring somebody in as a contractor. The problem is you have 5 other people who are doing the same or similar work. So now and they're W-2 employees. Now you've got this group who are doing the same or similar type of work. Some are W-2 employees, some are contractors. Huge red flag for the Department of Labor and the IRS. Similarly, temporary employees, there's a right time to use temps. And again, Susan has addressed that already. From a legal standpoint, there are some things to consider when you're using temp employees. What I'll see oftentimes is a claim after the fact. I'll see a claim by a temp worker bringing a claim against both the staffing agency who placed them and the employer at whose site they were placed. And there's this question, well, who's the employer? Is it the staffing agency or is it the employer where this person was placed? From a legal standpoint, the court oftentimes will say both. It's this theory of joint employer. The courts are going to say both. our employers. Okay, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. What the court's going to say, but there are some things you can do behind the scenes to protect yourself. If you're using that type of a contingent workforce, temporary employees, if you have one or more go-to temp agencies that you're working with, you should have a contract with those temp agencies that clearly spells out who's on first and who's on second. You're doing this, we're going to do this. And if you're lucky enough to be able to negotiate an indemnification provision within those contracts, you can say, in the event that this worker brings a claim against us for X, Y, and Z, you, temp agency, agree to either defend and or indemnify us. So there are ways you can protect yourself. So those are just a couple thoughts on that area.
Great, thank you. Darren, you've talked earlier about some of the specific things you've done to build culture. Talk a little bit about how some of those things have changed as Irish Titan has matured and grown as a business.
Sure. First of all, my takeaway from Mark's comments are make sure to shred your notes. I kid. And I would also echo Susan's comments about hiring for soft skills. One of the things that I've learned over the years is we can train people in certifications for certain software. Like we do a lot with Magento, this e-commerce platform. And as an enterprise level partner, their highest level, we have to maintain a certain number of developers who are certified in it. They're hard to find and they're expensive. And so we try to find people when we have needs that already check that box, that we prioritize that requirement very explicitly lower than how they fit our culture. POTUS, right? Like I can teach them, or I can't, but we can teach them Magento skills. We can't teach them how to be a good teammate, to reference the T in POTUS. And so there's different ways that we try to achieve that. And Meg, sitting right over here, uses or promotes a tool called Predictive Index. We've only scratched the surface with it. It's an assessment tool. It's not. There's no test because there's no right or wrong, right? Am I using some of the right verbiage? But we use that in some of our hiring process to get a sense of who people are and how they might fit, so that everybody works together well. But EQ over IQ all day. So that was a really good comment. In terms of how we've tried to nurture and maintain our culture as we've grown, that's been a challenge at certain times. And a couple of examples come to mind. James mentioned Row. And when we were smaller, 5 or 6 people, up to, 15-ish people, it was easy for us to maintain our Row environment. And again, Row stands for Results-Oriented Workplace. And what it really means is you don't really have a set schedule. I'm not monitoring how much you're working or vacation you're taking, et cetera. We have a lot of work to do. Let's all get it done. And it was easy when we were smaller, and I was in the trenches every day doing the same thing as everybody else. And there was sort of a all for one, one for all kind of mentality. And I think everybody bought off on one of the reasons I started my own company is because I wanted to create the kind of company I always wanted to work for. And I always thought it was stupid that I had to track vacation and be at a certain place at a certain time. Or like, trust me to be doing my job well, create an environment where I want to come in and kick ass, and I will. And so that was one of the reasons I started my own company. So for those reasons and for selfish reasons, as I've already said, I'm not good with details. I didn't want to track like how much people were working and that kind of stuff. So we had a Row environment. And when we hit around 15-ish people, it became more of a challenge because I wasn't there as much. I was out doing more and more things like this. And some of the people who were either formally or informally in charge of providing leadership and guidance and or management even weren't necessarily prepared to hold people accountable, to still getting their work done. And that's on me, really, not those people who weren't prepared for that. And so we've had some dips. Everybody thinks growth is like this. I'm trying to make it like this. And really it's not. It's like this. Right? And depending on what you're graphing, you might have multiple lines overlapping, going up and down in reverse from each other. So your revenue goes up and down, up and down, up and down maybe, while overall the trend line is up. But your profit might be going up and down in reverse of that, or maybe your head count goes up while your employee engagement is going down. So you have to manage those sorts of cycles as you grow your company. And Row was a good example for us, where as I was not there as much and or hands-on leading projects and client work, et cetera, we didn't always have some leadership in place that could reinforce those same principles. And I think that we've come out the other end now with some really strong performance there. But that's been an example of how as we've grown, we've struggled and had to course correct.
Okay, so I worked my way through the questions I had for all of them individually. I had some additional questions I'm going to ask the panel in whole. If somebody has questions at this point, raise your hand and I'll try to work you in. Ted, we got something up here. So if you didn't hear it in the back or on the sides, the question was how to use other things to push your culture, like recognition and other incentives and such.
Go ahead.
I think all those things are falling into the bucket of employee benefits and culture. You know, we now do happy hour in our office on Thursday afternoons, which is kind of a throwback to the 70s. And so far, we haven't run afoul of HR, but people feel like that's a benefit. We got Wine 30 on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, so recognition and supporting each other is a big part of our culture. I already mentioned we do a Titan of the Quarter, where that gets announced at the monthly company meeting. Their name gets put on a plaque that we have at the front. They get a little keepsake. Their picture is taken and put on social. So that's a big part of it. We also have what we call a kudos board. So we use Slack, in case people are familiar with Slack. I know at least some people are. We have a channel in Slack that's called the kudos channel. And so I don't know, at least every day or close to it, I think. People are posting kudos out there. Hey, Max just did a great job on this project. And then everybody kind of chimes in. Nice job, Max. We actually have a kudos board on one of our walls where people write little sticky notes for that kind of stuff. So those are some of the things that we've done from a recognition perspective. In terms of incentive, we do have a profit sharing plan. And I'll admit that over the last few years, it's seemed like people care less about it, which as the owner, sometimes like, why the hell isn't this like more talked about, right? Because that's profit that we're sharing when we meet certain thresholds. We have certain gating thresholds, and I think that sometimes that gets lost if you're not reinforcing your culture the right way to get there. Because I think that we have to pay pretty fairly in our industry. So most of the people at Irish Titan are making enough that that extra bump isn't necessarily as inspiring to them as feeling engaged, having good leadership, doing good work for good clients. So for example, either 2 or 3 years ago now, we had a pretty big speed bump. We already mentioned Magento. There was a big software release for Magento that was a complete disaster. It's known in the industry as a complete disaster. And we also, at the same time, were going through a lot of our growing pains. And so it was a collision of two unfortunate events. And we had some struggles then with some projects that didn't go very well, some clients who weren't very happy. And no matter what sort of profit sharing plan you have, those are tough times to navigate. And so I do believe in the value of profit sharing plans or whatever sort of financial incentive you might have in addition to the soft skills recognition, but you can't overlook the value of how people are feeling engaged or not at work.
I just have one comment, I guess, as it relates, Ted, to your specific question with incentive comp or any type of system that's going to award somebody. It could even be phantom stock, something that might not be guaranteed. The only issue I've seen, and by the way, most of the clients that I work with use some form of an incentive compensation system, at least for higher level employees. And the only issue I've seen that ties into this issue of retention is that an employee's looking at it as, well, this is not guaranteed money. I can go to this company and they're going to pay me X on a guaranteed salary. So there's kind of that weighing the costs and the benefits of having that type of a system. And I've seen this play out not only in my own workplace, but with respect to my clients also, that can become a retention issue. So yeah, I think keep that in mind as well.
Anything to add, Susan?
Well, I guess I would underscore what Darren says, that to me, employees are shown to be more motivated by engagement and doing meaningful work, and that those types of recognition go so much further. You know, the paycheck's great and it's required, and in the end, when you put these things on paper, you can kind of judge this versus that. But if you're in the kind of environment, well, that Scouts has or that Irish Titan has, where you are valued and you're called out every day, that's what makes a difference to employees.
Great. Yes. And
Yep.
hold that thought just for a second, just to repeat it over this way and for the video. If you didn't hear it, is Darren had a comment about the profit sharing maybe not incenting the employees like he thought it might. Are there other structures that would work? So I'm going to make a plug for my friend Jay over here, and we're going to be talking about ESOPs in November here at Club E for the full panel. But to Darren, any other structures that you thought about when doing the profit sharing, or things that you might be considering for the future?
Yeah, so I'm a giant fan of ESOPs. We have a couple of clients in that are structured as such. I'm on a board for one of our clients that's structured as such. I'm a giant fan of those, especially the concept of them is great. That's not in our near future for various reasons. But to your point, I think that some Titans' thought process is, well, I can kick ass at my job today, but that might not be contributing enough to profit for that to really kick into me, or those sorts of things. And so that is a normal thought process. We are constantly evaluating how we might change that so that there are incentives, whether they're compensation or not, for employees in ways that they can feel, right? Like, not everybody's motivated by comp as much as other things. Some people appreciate flexibility in schedule. Some people appreciate training, conferences, etc. So one of the things we're trying to do is get a better inventory of what really motivates people for extra going above and beyond sort of effort, and then figure out how we can reward that. One of the things I was going to mention is engagement is something that we specifically measure. And we use a tool called Office Vibe that is a fantastic tool. It was actually, ironically, suggested by one of our employees who would be the last person on the planet that I would have expected to suggest it, or even be aware of it. But it's a cloud-based tool that has an inventory of thousands of questions that industrial psychologists that either work for them or were paid by them put into this pool. And then all of your employees get a random sampling of, I think it's 5 questions every week. If all 4 of us are working for a company using Office Vibe, we could have 20 different questions amongst the 4 of us if there are 5. So we're not all getting the same 5 questions. The questions are categorized into things like health and wellness, communications, compensation, etc. And then those questions, they're answered, and it's really easy to use on mobile or desktop. It's a great UX, to use the term in our space, user experience. And then those questions get tallied, and you get a score. And you get a score if you take the time to set it up in the admin. You get a score by your org design, so you can see which team might be getting better communication and or feel more engaged. And so that is a tool we've been using for probably 2.5 years now, something like that. And it's been fantastic. And what I've noticed is our performance as a company has gone up in tandem, whether it's chicken or egg, right, with the increase in engagement.
I'll speak just briefly directly to the idea of stock ownership as a benefit or the efficacy of it. And I would agree with Darren that the organizations that we work with that are ESOP are overwhelmingly engaged. If you can do it, it's a great thing. We're a public company and we have a stock purchase program. 60% of our teammates are stockholders in the company, and I bring that up in presentations because I think it's huge. And I think it creates a sense of buy-in, creates a sense of we're all in this together. I think it's a wonderful benefit.
One thing I would just quickly chime in on too, because I hate politicians of either party that dodge questions, right, and just don't give a straight answer. We do have a long-term incentive phantom stock plan, too, that we use for selective employees.
Okay, so a couple of, I'm going to call it lightning round questions to get to a few that we didn't get to today. Best practice, one best practice in the area of selecting, recruiting, hiring, retaining that you'd like to share that's kind of one of your favorites with the audience. Anybody?
Know your audience, know who you're trying to attract and retain, and what's important to them.
Referrals. Your best employees will always be referrals, so keep your network strong, network every day, meet the right kind of people, and they'll introduce you to the right kind of people.
Don't be desperate. Know who you are, state that, and if you exclude sleeping hours, we're at work more than we're not. Pretty close to that, right? And so I want people who want to be at Irish Titan for who we are, not because I'm desperate because I need a body and a butt and a seat.
Training and development. Don't be afraid to invest in your employees and make sure that they know you're investing in them.
How about commonly practiced philosophy that you disagree with?
I can start with that one. I do not like the swim or sink mentality that you see in a lot of workplaces, and I think that's a deterrent to recruiting and retaining good employees.
I'll go next. We'll come, I guess, reverse. One of the things that I would say is don't cater to millennials or any specific group, right? I think that sometimes we do a disservice to the concept of leadership by talking about millennials too much. Millennials are just like Gen X or Gen Z that's now entering the workforce, or baby boomers, whoever it might be that's working for you. They want to be well led. They want to be respected. They want to feel engaged. Different people within any one of those demographics are going to be motivated by different things. So think about it more from a leadership perspective than catering to millennials.
This is probably blasphemous, but I don't think hiring should exist solely within HR. I think it's a lot to ask HR to know what they're recruiting for. So I would like to see more partnerships with the business or with staffing firms in order to get the right kind of person in the seat.
And I would just kind of keep with my consistent theme that a one-size-fits-all benefits program that is designed to cater to broad groups of people with very different wants and needs in different categories of both demographics but also employment. I think that too frequently there's sort of a, here's our plan, you fit into it, instead of the other way around.
Aside from a work shortage, another big challenge you see your clients or prospects facing today, other than the work shortage, other than just a tight labor market?
I see the remote workforce is becoming a continuing challenge for employers moving forward, figuring out how to deal with employees that are no longer physically in the same space as you, working remotely.
I think for us, I guess in our space, I might go to a bit of a crutch that is commonly talked about, and that's Amazon. A lot of our clients, because we do a lot of e-commerce, and so how they work with or against Amazon is a common topic.
I agree with Mark on the remote workforce. I think it's a benefit and can be a curse. I think similar to what James says, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to figure out who works best in that, how to cater to them, how to continue to be connected. I think it can be really great, and it can work in a lot of situations and save a lot of money, but it's has to be applied carefully.
I think the cost of health insurance and the continuing spiraling of that. When I started in this business in 1994, we commonly saw single rates at $100, family rates at $400 a month, and these are for plans that had maybe a $5 office visit copayment, no deductible. We frequently see single health insurance rates at $700 or $800, family rates $2,500 to $3,000. When family rates go to $4,000 a month, that's more than most people's mortgages. It's actually more than the average worker makes in a year before they buy a loaf of bread. So there's nothing on the horizon that would indicate to me that 10% year over year increase is ever going to stop. Using the rule of 78s, every 7.8 years the rates are going to double. So if we're paying $2,500 premiums now, there'll be $5,000 in 8 years, which is completely unsustainable.
Well, that's a day brightener. Okay, what's the next question? All right, no.
Honesty.
No, I'm kidding.
Transparency.
I'm kidding. I've seen it myself, so I agree with you. All right, so a couple of things. I'm going to do one more question for them to kind of have them wrap the day up. I want to plug next Thursday's event that I'm doing with Julie Keys and the Exit Planning Institute right here. So a week from tomorrow, we're going to be talking about acquisitions. I mentioned Jay over here from Boulay. Boulay is one of our Club E sponsors. We're going to be talking about ESOPs in November. I know it's a couple of months out, but it's November 8th. And then look for the next issue of Upsize, and you'll see a discussion and article about today's event. I will post on all the various social channels that Club E touches a video of today's event if you want to go back and revisit some of that stuff. Obviously, the 4 panelists will stick around, and feel free to come up and talk to them if you'd like to learn a little bit more. And that leads to kind of a last question, which is, again, kind of a both sides of the coin question. If you were going to leave everybody with kind of one thing to remember, either kind of to do and one thing maybe to avoid as they're thinking about this topic, what would that be? No particular order.
I will start. I will avoid well, actually, this is in contrast to what you say. I would avoid a slow hiring process. Now, we don't want to be desperate and make a bad hire, but we also don't want to get caught up in bureaucracy. And in terms of prioritizing, really look at the ROI of leaving a position open versus possibly bringing in a consultant. That could be a great cost to the organization when you could really add a lot of benefit by bringing the right person in for a short period of time.
I'll go second. The one takeaway I guess I'll provide, there is a whiteboard video from a company called RSA Animate, where there's some hand drawing on this whiteboard illustrating what the narrator is talking through, which is basically a summary of Daniel Pink's book Drive, if I remember right. It's called What Motivates Us. So look up the YouTube video for RSA Animate, What Motivates Us, and it's about a 7-8 minute video that is absolutely fantastic, that talks about autonomy, mastery, a few things like that, that really summarizes what employees are looking for.
As far as the do, I would say maintaining consistency with your internal policies and practices regarding hiring and managing employees. And then as far as a don't, I would say on this particular topic, try to avoid those knee-jerk reactions when you're deciding whether or not to use a contingent workforce.
And I'm just going to borrow from Darren's What's My Why, which is something that he graciously shared with me a number of years ago. When you're evaluating your benefits plan or strategy, I'd start with why. Why are we doing it this way? How did this start? Is this something that somebody thought of 10 years ago and it's no longer relevant? But break it and start over and ask yourself why.
All right, thank you all for being here. Again, please utilize the panel of experts if you can. They've been gracious with their support to our group, and let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you next week.